Okay, looks like everyone is in. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Wise. I'm an AOPA board member and board liaison to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Founded in 2022, the committee is AOPA's newest committee. During its first year, it determined its vision as well as potential ways it could support the membership. Our vision established is through its members, AOPA has a multitude of backgrounds, experiences, perspective, cultures, and diverse thought patterns that allow for creativity, growth, and innovation in a safe and inclusive environment. Our diverse experiences will enable us to better understand concerns and create solutions. The goal of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is to recognize all differences brought to the organization and create a culture where all feel that they matter, are respected, and belong. We support all members as well as share resources for professional and personal growth. In 2023, we issued a membership-wide survey to confirm what the membership would find valuable. The committee is now executing the biggest area we heard we could support the membership by providing education and resources. To this end, we are hosting a webinar every quarter. Following each webinar, resources will be presented in the OMP Almanac. The first webinar held over the summer was on generational differences in the profession. I'm excited to welcome you to our second webinar, which we hope you all find informative and engaging. Today's fast-paced, high-pressure environment is affecting OMP businesses. Specifically, burnout is an issue that is growing among those new to the OMP profession. During the next hour, you will learn the root causes of burnout and get actionable strategies to address them. You will gain the tools to foster a healthier, more productive work environment. I would now like to turn it over to today's moderator, Jerry Stark. Jerry Stark, PhD and CPO, is the Director of Clinical Operations and Technical Support for Bion IT Labs, based in Spoleto, Italy. He has written and presented numerous topics in OMP nationally and internationally, including causes and cures, systematic anxiety and burnout in OMP. In his 30-year career, Jerry has held various administrative positions in engineering, clinical care, product development, and education. Jerry, take it away.
Thanks so much, Linda. Thanks so much to AOPA for having this great opportunity. I'd like to introduce my exciting panelists. My first panelist, Brittany Gonzalez, CPO, MSOP, is a certified prosthetist orthotist with 8 years of clinical experience at Prosthetic Orthotic Group in Southern California. As a clinician, she specialized in cranial remolding orthoses, not prostheses, pediatric orthotics. She's eventually moved into management role at the company and oversaw the development of the business and compliance standards across multiple office locations. In September 2023, Brittany received a role as reimbursement manager at USER. Currently, she works at O&P providers across the country, helping them understand and obtain insurance coverage for their patients. Brittany also continues to be an advocate for patients through their involvement with several different O&P organizations. Some of her past and current committee members include AOPA's Coding and Reimbursement Committee, AOPA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, this one, and COPA's Government Affairs Committee. Brittany is also a member of the DME MAC councils for both Jurisdiction C and Jurisdiction D, and she enjoys guest lecturing at the OMP Master's Program at California State University, Dominguez Hills. She earned her BS in Biomedical Engineering from California, Cal Poly State University, San Luis Obispo, and her MS in Orthotics and Prosthetics from California State University, Dominguez Hills. Brittany currently resides in San Pedro, California, with her husband and 2 daughters. The second person is Jim Kingsley. He spent the last 13 years in the OMP industry working as a regional vice president at Hanger, and prior to that as chief operating officer for Sheck & Cyrus. Over his career, he's served in accounting, sales, marketing, business development, mergers and acquisitions, operations, and general management roles. Mr. Kingsley has worked in startups and turnaround companies, as well as Fortune 500 companies such as AT&T and Emerson Electric. He currently is a member of the board of directors for AOPA and for the OMP Foundation. Jim holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in accountancy from the University of Illinois and a Master of Business Administration from the Kellogg School of Management. And my last panelist, Drew Wyatt. Did I say your name? I just said your name improperly, Drew. What is it? How do you say it?
Wyant. Yep.
Wyant is an Indiana native and 2007 graduate of DePauw University. He attended SIUE for a master's in exercise physiology, Northwestern for his CO, and University of Hartford for his MSPO. After spending 10 years in orthotics and prosthetics, Drew decided to pursue his true passion of a career in real estate. Since that time, he's become one of the top producing agents of the state of Indiana and currently opened his own brokerage firm. Is it in Columbus, Indiana, Drew?
Yep, we're based in the greater Indianapolis area.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So that's our panelists. And the next thing we're going to do is maybe just kind of give an overview of burnout. Is that all right? Is that all right with everyone? In sales, I would say, is that fair? And of course it is. Let's move it forward. All right. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to share my screen. We're just going to talk a little bit about burnout, just a little bit in terms of some of the research that's been done, some of my research. It's more inclusive than just what I've done. But when we look at burnout, I came to it in a backwards way. I'm a mechanical engineer. What I noticed is there was a certain level of anxiety when I was asking about, who is serving the needs of the profession from 2002 when they said there would be a shortage by 2020. And in the comments, I saw quite a bit of anxiety and burnout. So I wanted to know more. And so when I asked about burnout, I saw an average burnout score. Our average level of burnout is at 43. So we're all at risk of burnout. And 29% of us are at a severe risk. So 1 in 3 of you are actually right there in terms of burnout, and 1 in 10 at severe levels. The highest rating was 3.45 with the comment, I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. And then 3.27, I'm very frustrated with parts of my job. And then 3.21, I find that I just don't have as much time to plan as much as I'd like to. And 4 and 5s were just dealing with bureaucracy. In terms of burnout, in terms of the whole profession, prosthetist and orthotist is a little bit less than a nurse, a little bit more than maybe an occupational therapist. And this is the red zone of burnout. So we're just on the other edge of it in terms of the research that we see. The comments are, what are these due to? One is to volume of patients that we see, although the number of patients we see has not changed. The amount of documentation needed is management pressure for revenue, mainly that I really have no control over necessarily other than making sure my documentation is great. And then reimbursement helplessness. I really can't dictate what revenue I get. I can only be responsible for what I can control. And then career disenchantment in terms of debt among the younger group. The part that I was a little bit surprised by is that normally 11 to 15 years shows the greatest level of unhappiness, but what I saw 0 to 5 had an increased rate, although it's not necessarily statistically significant. I noticed the opposite in terms of innovation. So I think this has to do with the two-tiered way we lead our profession in terms of organizational processes and structures, and the techno-structural approach where we have to provide answers clinically. And so we have to sell confidence, don't we? We're not the only ones. We have to do this in terms of customer service and the clergy, teaching, if you're in food service, customer service at a hotel, or healthcare. So we're also responsible for things that are relatively unpredictable. We just don't know what's going to come through that door. So we have to be prepared for it. We have personal preparation, team preparation, and contextual preparation. This all leads to this idea of emotional labor. You've probably seen a flight attendant going bye-bye. They've survived about 4 different flights that day, and they're not really interested in whether or not you want to say hello to them. They just want to make sure that you understand you're off the plane now. Okay, learned helplessness affects us in terms of we did some experiments, not we, but the University of Pennsylvania. If we have no control over our context, we begin to just learn how to deal with the punishment rather than try to change it. And so that's when we have this idea of quiet quitting. So anywhere from 18 to 24% of your employees, and not just your employees, your managers, your leaders, have decided to pull back a little bit. So when we ask how happy you are, really most identify that they just are doing what they need to do. And then if we jump ahead, what's interesting is the group that has quietly quit the most is 16 to 20 years. So they learned to be burned out at 11 to 15 years, but by 16 to 20 years, they've made that compromise and decided to pull back. So this is what's kind of interesting in terms of burnout and in different phases of your career. And I noticed the same in terms of innovation adoption. So since innovation adoption is based on risk, and we're all different levels of reactive levels, we can look at, I'm just jumping ahead, we can look at things that we get in terms of the risk of innovation, and anxiety and burnout affect them. We as clinicians get and understand how to enhance quality of life and relationship with the patient. Where we falter more is developing the narrative to describe how innovations can help us. So when I looked at how burnout affects innovation adoption, I found that people are actually pretty optimistic about technology's ability to help them the more burned out they are. The thing they are not up for is being the first to implement that. Does that make sense? So they really look to technology to save them, but it won't, in the end, they'd not want to be the first one to risk anything or make a gamble. And that's what we count on our employees to do. And I saw this also with students, actually. Students that did more online learning versus active learning, they had less, the ones that did active learning had a little less confidence as they went to their residency. And the reason is they knew what they didn't know, right? They felt a little bit more grounded as opposed to the ones who felt pretty confident in the virtual environment context that was created for them. So the thing is, as we move forward in healthcare, is that it's really not about components, it's about relationships. Those relationships are tested with burnout and quiet quitting. So it's one of the most important things that we need to deal with. So that kind of gives us a quick little overview. Is that a good place to get started, Joy? And so next we're going to turn it over to Jim, who can talk about any burnout you've noticed and how it impacts the industries you've been affiliated with.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, it's pretty clear that burnout is a huge issue in the healthcare industry and actually beyond. But we also live in a world that I believe is a little less civil than maybe it was 8 to 10 years ago. And what I see, obviously, we have patient clinics and we have patients coming in every day, and a lot of times those patients are bringing in their own frustration from whatever else is going on in their lives, and they tend to offload it on our team, which is kind of what Jerry talked about. You don't know what's coming through that door. It could be the nicest person you've met, or it could be somebody who's going to treat you like you're a second class citizen, and that I'm mad as hell, and I'm going to project that on you. And we have a pretty low tolerance for that. And caution patients to that have been reported for treating our team in an inappropriate way. But that front desk job is kind of the first stop, and that's where I see a lot of it. I see frustration. We survey our employees a couple times a year, and I started seeing this sense of frustration. I feel like I'm not making a difference. I feel like I'm not valued in my position. And then, of course, ultimately, we saw our attrition rate start to increase in those areas, and that creates a little bit of a domino effect, right? Because that person decides to quit. Now, let's say we had two people at the front desk. Now we have only one person who's got to deal with all of that on their own. You got to take time to try and hire someone to fill that position. Then you got to train them, and basically, once the attrition wagon starts, it puts more pressure on everyone else. So it's really a challenge that we have to try to avoid. And a lot of it is trying to provide some flexibility to our team, but really it's just something that you have to keep your eyes open to, because it's going to happen. And there's external and there's also internal. Other employees, sometimes when you start seeing that happening, there's less sense of teamwork. There's a little more bickering internally in our office between maybe the admin team and the clinical team. So I've seen it firsthand. And we'll talk a little later about some of the things we've done about it, but it's real and it's here.
So it's kind of a network, a social network, and sometimes that network gets strained. And then when we see one individual, like you mentioned, receptionists, if they're out a lot, maybe they're sick a lot and they're physically sick, It's just that they're taking on a lot of that anxiety of that collective, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So we're going to kick it over to Brittany. Brittany, do you mind sharing your story?
Yeah, so I was a clinician for 8 years, including my first 2 years of residency in Southern California. And I enjoyed it for a while, but once I had my first daughter, when I came back from maternity leave, I realized all the joys of young kids and them getting sick when they're in daycare. And sometimes it really was every other week. My first daughter was born just before COVID, so she wasn't even a year old when COVID hit, and that was a whole nother enjoyable experience that we had to manage between me and my husband. He also did not have work from home abilities throughout COVID, just like me. So it made it really hard when our daughter was home very often for being sick and being in patient care. I held a lot of guilt of either I had to reschedule the patients, and a lot of times I was working with, like I said, cranial remolding kids. And so the parents took time off work to come in, and I'd have to cancel on them and reschedule, and that was frustrating for them, understandably. Or I had to put that burden on my colleagues and have them take over and see the patients that I couldn't see because I was calling out. And it caused a lot of strain, not only in the office, but within my marriage. And it was hard. It became very hard to manage, and even more so once I had my second daughter. So when I came back from maternity leave the second time, I kind of knew that I couldn't manage the day-to-day patient care schedule anymore. And my job was nice enough to let me go more into a management operations role where I could step away and work from home if I needed to in certain aspects, as my kids got sick and things like that. And it worked well for a while, but eventually they wanted me to go back into patient care. My heart just wasn't in it anymore. I had a lot of anxiety around this scheduling conflicts. So I decided to look elsewhere for a remote job, which luckily I was able to find one. So that was kind of my story, but it was really hard. I did feel a lot of burnout and that anxiety of the push and pull of trying to manage the whole situation, you know, and I feel like I did put a lot of pressure on myself to manage it versus reaching out for help. And we'll talk more about that later. But that's my story and how I got here.
So it's really a big emotional burden, that emotional labor of being, how do you appear to the patient when you're dealing with all this other stuff that you're dealing with your own family, right? And
Right.
then also to be able to present that in a confident way, but support the rest of the group. So it is a difficult situation. You're not in control of it in a lot of ways. You're kind of floating in this chaos, the sea of chaos. So
Yes.
I hope I didn't mischaracterize that though.
No, not at all.
Okay, Mr. Drew, tell us your story.
Yeah. So similar to Brittany, I was in the field as a practicing clinician for about 10 years. So I started out as a technician and then becoming a pedorthist, and then was working there full time, went and got my CO, and then kept going, working at the same clinic, and then finished the MSPO program. So it was one of those things I didn't really realize I was burning out. Along the way, we had opened up, I had started at a new clinic when I first started, and then spun off and helped the practice open 2 additional clinics, all while I was going to school and everything else. So I think a lot of it was, you know, after 10 years of doing that, I kind of looked and was like, hey, this isn't, you know, as enjoyable as I probably thought it was. And interestingly, the more responsibility I took on and the more schooling I went to, the probably work satisfaction decreased. Where you think it would probably increase as you learn more things, and that as you go on and open more clinics and things like that, it starts to weigh on you. So, but yeah, I spent 10 years doing that.
More gets put on you, right? Your reward
exactly.
for hard work is what? More hard work, right?
Yeah. And similar to Brittany, my spouse, she owns her own business, didn't have any flexibility of her own. So a lot of that, you know, we have 2 young kids. A lot of that would often fall on me. And you know, she's in healthcare as well. So on days where each of us were, you know, seeing 20 to 30 patients, it's hard to figure out who has to go get the sick kid from daycare, things like that. So
It's
makes it
tough to
difficult.
say, but our spouses are our partners, our kids, our network helps us to do our work sometimes because we're really looking to find ways to get help. So just one quick question. Did Brittany and Drew, did you guys feel that you approached management in any way, about the situation? And if you did, how is that regarded? Maybe I'll ask you, Brittany.
Yeah, so I feel like I was not as vocal about it. I would bring up, small things here and there of, hey, I feel like we need more support in this way at the company. But I don't think I ever really sat down and said, I'm burning out. I can't do this anymore. I I think I had an issue with coming across as I can't do it all. One of those toxic traits of just, you want to look like you can do it and you can take on these responsibilities. And I didn't want to show that I couldn't. And so I was nervous about how that would come off. So I know I did not have a specific conversation about burnout, but I did along the way try to have conversations about how maybe we could help by, maybe hiring more people or being more efficient within the practice, and solving some of the issues that were leading to the burnout.
Well, we want to be independent, right? We want to
Yeah.
handle it. And yet we're trying to handle the unhandleable. What about you, Drew? Did you approach management?
Yeah, so in a similar way, I probably didn't realize I was burning out, other than again, my wife telling me maybe I was saying less good things about work and more bad things. And so what I had tried to do was actually take unpaid time off, or buy back time to have more paid time off, or essentially unpaid time off. But I was running at the time two offices that were I was the only practitioner there with no technician or anything. So getting that time off wasn't an option. So and that was ultimately the kind of straw that broke the camel's back. Was, I wanted more than 2 weeks off a year, and felt like that wasn't an unreasonable request, but it wasn't something they were able to grant. And that's when I decided I was, time to move on to something else.
So Jim and Linda, from management's side of things, it's kind of tough to really divine where an employee is at, especially your top performers. They don't want to tell you that they're having issues, right? And so you have to look for artifacts. Are there any things that you do to look at these different, what kind of artifacts do you look at with employees when they are starting to burn out?
Jim?
Sure. Yeah, you're right, Jerry. It can be a little bit challenging. So a lot of times I rely on my leadership team that's out there in the field every day. And I tell them to be on the lookout for, again, that front office people. How are they answering the phone? Do they still sound, if they've always been cheerful, is there a little more edge, or is there a little more flat demeanor than maybe what you're typically used to? Or just, again, interactions within team meetings, even around the lunch table. If someone's just kind of had it, they just start withdrawing a little bit, and you can see it in their personality. Sometimes it's lower productivity. Work starts piling up a little bit, and you're like, wow, you're getting behind. It can be even as simple as slow response time to emails, where they're just, they got hundreds of emails coming in. They're just kind of frazzled, and sometimes they just let them go by. So those are all kind of things that I tell people to be on the lookout for. Basically, differences in behavior that you became accustomed to from your interactions over a period of time with those employees.
Yeah, and I will add also, just, looking at their time off, if it's an employee who rarely, takes a lot of time off and all of a sudden they're down to, 0 vacation days, that could be a sign too, there's definitely something going on. So to Jim's point, I think just, having some type of relationship with the individual and lean on other staff members to give you some guidance as well.
So about 15% of employees decided to pull back. You don't know what you're not getting because they don't tell you, you don't know. Mm-hmm. So 15% of employees said they didn't care if their other employees noticed something different about them. They still were only going to pull back and quietly quit, in a sense, or quietly, maybe not do as much. Did you, Drew and Brittany, ever get to a point where you kind of just said, look, I'm going to have to make a negotiation here. I can give to you what I think is yours, but at some point I'm going to have to, I think you mentioned that, Brittany, that you kind of had to make a choice, right?
Yeah, I definitely tried to manage it. I mean, my choice ended up being to go and find a remote job, which I was lucky enough to find. But yeah, I mean, I tried really hard not to what we call quiet quit, but I would say towards the end of my time there at that company, I was taking the stress home with me. It was affecting how I was not only at work but at home. I started dreading going into the office and ultimately just lost motivation. So with that, you know, you're not putting in as much effort as maybe you would have if you're extremely excited about the job and motivated about the job. And again, I couldn't, my toxic trait was not being able to say no and kind of balance it. It was either all or nothing. And that's something that I still work on to this day of finding that balance. And I think a lot of it was, you know, not an issue of the company, but more of just me learning how to manage my time effectively and in a way that, you know, allowed for that work-life balance and not making it all or nothing.
Right. Drew?
Yeah, and I think, you know, looking back, I mean, asking for, other than just asking for more time off, realizing that asking for help, you know, from a technical standpoint, things like that would have been really helpful. Because again, when you're in clinics by yourself, it doesn't really feel like you can kind of pull back because there's no one else there to support you. So a lot of it is, even if you wanted to take, take a day off or so, you take that home knowing that you're going to have twice as much work to do the next day, and there's no one. Taking a day off isn't a great solution because the work is still there. So
you're afraid to take vacations in a way.
Exactly, yeah, because you kind of dread it, knowing that all of it's going to be waiting when there's no one else to fill your spot while you're gone. It's all going to be waiting for you when you get back. So so those sort of things, I think would have been, in hindsight, saying, hey, like, can someone backfill me? Can we get somebody in here so that way I can actually take time off and not bring it home, and again, which affects all of your other relationships.
Were there any indicators or things that you notice, hey, something's going on here with me? Was it both of you have mentioned maybe your spouses let you know, but was it other things too? Did you notice? One thing I have to admit to, when I know I'm burned out when I have lack of mental traction. I can't seem to keep mentally focused, and I want to all I can. It's just really tough for me to maintain that because my mind wants to be unharnessed, untethered, right? It wants to do its own thing. What told you that maybe you're burned out?
Yeah, I think spouse was a big one, because again, they're reading your mood in a way that you're not. And then I think you notice a lot of things like, yeah, maybe you're not responding to emails as quickly, you're not arriving to work quite as early or with as much urgency or excitement to get there, and maybe you're leaving, as quickly as you can instead of, hey, staying a little longer to make sure you get all your notes done, everything else. So when you're in a good mental space, that kind of stuff doesn't wear on you. But when you are burnt out, any extra little request or things like that can really, snowball and make things worse.
Were there anything that helped you with that, like exercise or change of sleep patterns, or did all those things you tried and they just continued the feeling of burning out?
Go ahead, Drew.
No, yeah, and I actually used to walk and ride my bike to work, or even ride my bike to different hospital appointments and things like that. So I tried to make it as fun as possible, but really, nothing from there was helpful enough to kind of keep me in the field.
Yeah, one example I have is early on when I was a young resident, documentation was a big thing that I spent a lot of time after hours. I easily stayed till 7 o'clock a lot of days. after to just make sure my notes were done. And that's because I was much less efficient because I was brand new and just learning everything. So I was able to early on figure out, hey, I got to block more time in my schedule to be able to do notes. So whether for me, what worked out well was just making the individual appointments longer because I didn't like putting all of my notes together at the end of the day, like a block of time. I'd rather see the patient, go write the note, see the next patient, write the note. So I just made sure that there was enough time in my schedule to do the documentation and see the patient within that scheduled time. And that really helped me. That was something I noticed early on, and it helped me a lot once I kind of streamlined and then didn't have to stay those extra hours anymore, and was able to get all my work done within the normal workday.
So there's a paradox. People who are burned out look for technology to save them. They just don't want to be the one to figure it out. So that's a tough one. How do you get both of those? So when we think about that, Linda and Jim, how do we help employees see what technologies could maybe help them? Because they're suffering in silence. They're going to keep pursuing it. How do we as leaders try to help them in some way?
Yeah, I would
mean,
say,
the first thing is
Sorry, Jim. We'll let Linda.
go ahead, Linda.
yeah, that's all right. I would say, really have those one-on-one meetings with them, and number one, ask them, if they are struggling with prioritizing. I mean, helping your employees prioritize things is, it's a basic, but I think it certainly helps. I know I've done it with my staff members, and then that's when you're going to find out if there's gaps that maybe somebody else can help with, and take some of that burden off of them.
They could be valuing things that aren't really that big a deal because we have a list of 6 things, but really only 2 are the big deal, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a lot of tools that we tend to use in our daily work when you talk about technology, that are supposed to make things easier: email, Teams messaging, Excel, maybe. And one of the things I always talk about is try and make sure, provide people some training so that they can learn not so much how to use your email system, but how to use it efficiently, filtering, screening, trying to take the things that aren't important and filter them out so that you can focus on a few things and then get back to your job. One of the things I've found certainly in our industry is there's this culture of, if I'm not seeing patients every second of my day, I'm not doing my job. And I spend a lot of time talking to our team about saying one of the best things you can do is to block out some time in your schedule to catch up on your notes, to do a little breathing, or go outside and look around, look up from your desk or your patient bench. And I think those are real important elements to just kind of reset yourself a little bit, take some time, and don't feel guilty that there's an hour in your schedule, once or maybe multiple times a week, maybe every day as needed, to just have a little me time and clean up some things that don't hang over your head. Because part of that burnout too is this feeling like I'll never catch up, I'll never get done, I'm always going to be behind. And to the extent you can spend a little time trying to keep that from building up too big, I think that helps a lot.
I would try to do some of that, but then when the patient came in 15 minutes early, well, I'm enjoying the outdoors, maybe smelling some flowers. But it's this sense of service, right, that wears us out. We want to be of service to people. So it's a good thing, but also drives us so hard. One thing I wanted to ask Linda and Jim, we talk about employees having burnout, but guess what? Managers have as much, if not more. I remember someone coming to me and saying, Jerry, I think I'm burned out. I think physically I'm not thinking as fast. I feel tired. I feel achy a lot. And I'm looking at them and thinking, I have the same symptoms. I think maybe I'm burned out. So what do you deal with as a manager when you start to feel burned out? Of course, you can't portray that necessarily. So that's an additional level of emotional labor, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier, and that's having an outlet. Where can you put some of this energy? Is it going for a walk? Is it riding your bike, exercise it? Is it, something else, some kind of passion where you can funnel some energy in a different space for a little bit and just, get out of the work mindset and into a different space that you really love and enjoy?
Yeah. One of my old bosses, Mark Edwards, said to me, "You know what your problem is?" And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "You can say no." And I didn't really know that. It seems very simple, but I didn't know that. So having said that, Jim and Linda, how do we provide as employers, as managers, how do we said a little bit, Linda, about, setting priorities. What other things can we do to really help employees that are feeling that sense of burnout when we recognize it?
One of the things that I like to do, Jerry, is part of burnout is just this feeling that you're just not making a difference anymore, and that there's all these things are acting on you, and you're not really acting on others. So I always try and reach out and just check in with people and say, hey, thank you. Thank you for doing that. That really helped us get through this. Or I just got this patient. I collect, we have an NPS system that we get patient comments, and I'll send out an email or do it in a team meeting where I read through those to remind the great work that you're doing. You got to look, if you look at the small picture, it's easy to get depressed. If you look at the bigger picture and realize that through all this, you're changing people's lives, you're giving them the gift of mobility, and that's pretty powerful. Drew, you talked about how I don't even want the time off because then I know I'm going to come back to it. To that end, I always try myself. I avoid sending emails out outside of hours. 8 o'clock at night, I'm not going to send an email. I'm going to send it, but I'm going to schedule it for delivery the next morning. Weekends, same thing. I encourage my team to not send that out, because then you walk in Monday morning, you got this load of stuff, or the next day, and just trying to keep things more in the 8 to 5 environment, I think helps a little bit as well.
Right. And to just tag on to that, Jim, I think it's really important when an employee does take vacation is to let them have that vacation and make it clear, like, you don't expect them to be on email. You don't expect them to answer phones, and, talk to the other staff members and say, if you're always going to, Sherry for this task, see if you can find somebody else so Sherry's email isn't stacked up when she gets back. I think it's really important for people to know they can go on vacation and just take a mental break.
So this question is back to Drew and to Brittany. Sometimes I think the people who are the top performers are the ones most susceptible to burnout. In fact, in my surveys, I saw this, right? The people that are the top performers that throw out the most energy for your organization seem to be the ones who tend to have the greatest amount of burnout. And that's why I think I see 0 to 5, which is a little scary. 0 to 5 is the second highest group. Normally, in most of the surveys I've done, 10 to actually 11 to 15 is the highest, 9 or 5 to 9 or 5 to 10 is the second highest. Why do you think the top performers are most susceptible, and what can we do about that?
I think it kind of goes back to the idea of not wanting to seem like you can't do it all. And it's in your nature to take it on and not necessarily recognize how it's affecting you beyond the work. And so I think, top performers just tend to put their head down and do the work and not complain about it. And they, again, going back to the comment that was made earlier about, if you do more work, you're then responsible for more work. And so I think companies also notice, hey, this person's capable of a lot, so I'm going to put more on their plate. And so it's kind of this roundabout of, the person can't say no, that doesn't want to say no. They want to take on more responsibility, move up in the company, show that they're capable. But by doing that, they then take on too much work and don't leave space for them to be able to kind of mentally separate from work and be able to kind of have this balance that we've been talking about.
Certainly, it's a strategy they learned was successful in the past, but doesn't lead to fulfillment in the present, right? Where they're
Right.
at. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you didn't. You're good.
And Drew, what do you think about that? Top performers are most susceptible.
Yeah, I mean, really just, I agree with everything Brittany said. I mean, people who are generally top performers got there by, putting in a lot of work and effort and, to do well, it takes a lot of that. And so you're going to keep saying yes to new opportunities and keep trying harder and putting in the time. And again, I think that just stacks up on people to where they're, a top performer may be less content with their position than someone else who isn't. But again, overall life satisfaction and work satisfaction is, probably not, maybe higher in those groups that are fine without being the top performer.
So Jim and Linda, you've probably seen this in organizations, right? Where you have these top performers driving forward. And here's the kind of shadow area. Some of the employees are letting them. They're letting them lead forward when a good team of people are pushing at the same time. So what do you do about that? Do you tell a top performer, all right, that's enough. You've done quite enough. You've exceeded my expectations. Now you have to, let's move with things. How do you balance that? How do you find that balance? How do you measure it? How do you even notice it, Jim?
Yeah, it's tricky because, as Drew said, your high performers, they're not the ones who like to complain. They're used to success. They're used to driving and just powering through things. And at some point, that's where you realize, you just can't always overcome it yourself. So one of the things, and obviously your top performers are people you want to keep happy. So it's usually sitting down. I like either myself or if they have a direct manager to sit down with them and talk it through a little bit and talk about what it takes to be successful and that they can continue to be successful without trying to do everything. Right. And we believe a lot in teamwork where we try and keep people from feeling like it's all on themselves, where we work in teams, we bonus our people together as teams. So there's other people they can talk to on a day when maybe they're down a little bit. They might have someone else cover a clinic for them or do an on-call or whatever. But just those little type of things that say, I notice, I'm aware. And I can't shut down all your patients and make it all go away or send you off on just a 2-week vacation. But if I think a vacation will help, I do encourage that. But then again, you got to have the support capability around it, so they don't feel like they're just delaying the inevitable. So it's a real balance game, but a lot of it starts with open and honest conversation, and again, reminding them of the great things they're doing, and to kind of hang in there and to have an open dialogue with their team, with their leadership, because we're there to help and we want to try and remove any obstacles that we can remove. It's important for us to do that as well.
So I had a boss who said, Jerry, all this work on burnout, quiet quitting, I have one solution. I said, what's that? He said, you bonus them, you pay them more. Just pay them more. That'll solve it. And so, sorry, Jerry, but what you're talking about is not relevant to me. So what do you, Drew and Brittany, what do you think? Could I just have paid you more to get your quiet quitting, to get your burnout solved? Would that have been the best thing?
No, I don't think so. I think that there
Would
is
$5,000 cure your burnout?
I think there is a financial aspect. If people feel like they're not being paid enough, that does weigh on somebody for burnout as well. But it's not the entire solution. I think it's a lot more of a mindset. It's the work-life balance. For me, family is everything. So when things are rocky at home and I'm taking work home with me, that's most important. And that's where no amount of money can fix that if it's a scheduling issue. I'm not going to want to be paid double what I'm being paid to still have issues, when I come home and not being happy there. So I don't think I understand why people think like that is the solution, or some people think that, but it's because I do think it is a part of it. In some situations, but I think what's most important is sitting down and having a conversation with the person and understanding what's most important to them. Maybe it is money, and if it is, then that's the conversation. But I believe more times than not, that's just a small factor in what actually is going on.
I found it number 3. So number one was recognition by your peers as being valuable. Number two was, are you helping me develop my career? And number three was indeed, is my pay equitable? They weren't asking for more than what they were worth, but is it at least equitable? What do you think about that, Drew?
Yeah, I certainly think pay has something to do with it, and could potentially, if you're just looking to retain employees, I think pay is a big part of that. But I don't think it necessarily will make employees happier or, more likely to enjoy coming to work. So, again, as long as someone is paid roughly what they think they're worth, then, I think they're going to be okay with that. If you pay somebody more than what they're worth, they may stay around for longer. But if they don't have the support system in place to where they feel like, the success of whatever they're doing isn't completely on them all the time, I don't think it'll make a long-term difference.
So one other topic, just kind of talking about the elephant in the room, I mentioned the second highest level of burnout is 0 to 5, which scares me because what happens when they hit 11 to 15 and things do get tough, right? Well, they were at where you guys were at. Why do you think 0 to 5 has a higher rate of burnout, or at least expressed burnout? What do you think are some of the reasons, you guys? Everyone can answer that. Is it
I think
demographic? Is just that they're younger and they don't know how to work yet? What do you think?
no, I think that there's a lot changing in this industry and right now, and I think my job now is reimbursement manager, so I see the realm of reimbursement and how taxing it is. It's such an administrative burden on these companies, and I think in school, young students are so excited, they're motivated to help patients and do this and help these patients walk and live a better life. And then they get into the field and actually start practicing, and they're kind of slapped with the reality of insurance isn't going to cover that. And, all of those pressures that come along with it, or your documentation is not good enough and you're getting denials and having to write appeals. And I think when you go from school to clinical care and actually working in O&P, I think there's a little bit of a shock value there. That's like, this is not what I was expecting. And there's a lot more work that goes into it to get the care that you want for your patients. And you end up getting frustrated for your patients. You take on that emotional burden. And I think you feel burnout quicker because of it.
Well, it's certainly a portrayal of it as a research-led, outcome-led profession, right? And that's where they're taught in school. And I think that's great. I think that actually needs to be taught in school. One of the comments from the from the survey was that I approached my boss and said, I would like to participate in research. And the boss said, why don't you research that plaster trap for me and let me know what you think of it? We laugh a little bit about it, but that is that juxtaposition, isn't it, Drew? You're taught that it's going to be this science, and then you get into it and someone says, well, can you bust up those plaster molds for me? I don't know if you have an opinion about that, Drew.
Yeah, and I think and again, kind of a lot of what Brittany said is there's a big difference between school where you're learning a lot, and again, you're working a lot with peers and patient models and things like that, and then you get into the real world, and not everything goes great. Not every patient is going to have the outcome that you want, and it's no matter sometimes how hard you try, either the item's not going to be covered or the patient isn't going to be compliant. And I think that builds up a lot. I know with other people that I worked with was, again, you can, and actually a doctor that I used to work with all the time, but always tell patients that, he couldn't be the person who cared most about their health. And a lot of times we are. And that part, I think, leads to a lot of frustration when you spend 9 hours a day trying to make people better, and they don't spend that amount of time. And so it doesn't take long. It's not surprising that 0 to 5 years. I mean, it doesn't take many years of that to start to weigh on people.
So it's one thing that's interesting. I brought this burnout rate, this maybe even attrition rate at around anywhere from 18 to 24%, as far as I can tell statistically. Some people say much more, but I'm saying 18 to 24% is what I see in my surveys. one young person said, isn't that the same attrition rate as in nursing? And it is. So she said, in a very informed way, we all have master's degrees now. Isn't it just O&P coming of age? And now it has to accept an attrition rate that's like other professions in healthcare. And I don't know, Jim, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's some truth to it. To me, I've had, 1, 2, 3 year clinicians just kind of walk away. Sometimes they'll leave and they'll go, try some other things. But I also know there's that they just jump out of the industry and they're saying, this isn't what I thought it would be. This doesn't get me where I need to be. And it's a big decision given what it costs and probably a loan balance you're carrying around after doing that. But I think there's a change in this generation that is a little more, work life balance is really important to me. And if I just don't see a pathway to get there, I'm not afraid. I'm young and I can go out and do something else. And there's a lot of times where I feel like I'm just like, are you sure this is the right decision? Hang in there with us. And sometimes that works, but other times, it hasn't. And it's just, it's surprising, but it's incumbent on us to do a better job of making those early experiences be valuable. Sometimes the new, residents or even your first or second year, give them the inserts, give them the shoes, and really you have to say, no, get them involved in some cool, complex things. Let them present a patient case at our next training. Let them see some of the exciting stuff that is out there. A lot of times, the more seasoned people get that, but you got to give them a taste of it. Otherwise, I think it's easy to get disenchanted.
I think sometimes there's a tendency to hold them back. And I think I want to push them forward, almost in a video game sort of way, right? When you don't learn about flying before you fly in a video game, you're flying and you make some mistakes. So sometimes it's fun to just let's move you along and give you more challenges. Let's not wait. Let's not build this groundswell of knowledge. So let's get to the simulation first. Well, we're almost coming up on time, aren't we, Joy? And I wanted to ask you all in the audience, what is there, like 84 people, Joy? What's going on here? I see so many names, cast of thousands. Is there anyone that has some questions for this esteemed panel? And all the easy ones come to me. The hard ones go to the other people. They're just more qualified.
And you can put it in chat if you don't want to show
put
your
it
face
in
and
chat.
get on microphone.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you. Which group had the highest level of burnout and anxiety? Was it groups private groups? Was it regional players or was it corporate groups? What do you guys think? What would be your guess? 1 out of 3. I would have guessed maybe corporate.
Yeah, I would have too.
It was regional. And the regional level, they have all the hardships of the single office where they have the risk, the financial risk every day. And then they also have the management issues too. So I think at their regional level, so you're in the danger zone if you're 11 to 15 years, regional level, and a manager. Managers have the highest level of anxiety. So when you're trying to keep people moving, What do you agree with that, Kevin Hagemeyer? How about you, Tom Martin? How do you guys deal with burnout? How do you keep students interested?
I think the big thing is driving that work-life balance and just being able to walk away. You're saying you
drive them to work? That's a great idea.
I must have missed something on that, Jerry.
No, but you're saying that driving that work-life balance, that they're responsible for their lives, right?
Yes. And get them to speak up. I think that's the hardest thing, both whether you're in an entry-level resident position or all the way somewhere up in middle and upper management, is being able to express yourself and speak up and not feel like either you're going to let somebody down from a personal aspect of it, or somehow you're going to be condemned by your employer or boss superior by speaking up. So
Right.
I think Brittany kind of, spoke to that as well as Drew, just in being able to speak up when things are not going right. And,
That's a tough one,
most of
isn't it?
us,
Yeah.
and most of us have a lot of pride in ourselves, and that, we don't want to be the person on the team that, is not carrying out their responsibilities. So we don't want to say anything. So
what do you do when you're feeling burned out?
shut it down and go home.
You know when to say, okay, well, that's enough for today, right? You know your limits, right?
Well, the sad thing is that I'm from the generation that work until it's done. So, I'm kind of always the first one here and the last one to go home. So I'm probably the last person to ask about, how to shut it off, even though I encourage everybody else to shut it off. Last night they turned the alarm on me. I didn't even realize it. I'm like walking out of the building, the alarm starts going off because I'm still here.
That's a sign you're burned out. Yeah, when things start happening. I call it the jester is out. I left my bag at work. I left my computer at work. How can I do anything? I don't know. Tom Martin, what do you think? How do you recognize burnout with younger employees?
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Oh, perfect. I mean, I think for your employees, you need to, I think that work-life balance is a big thing, especially with the younger generation. And I think giving recognition and, recognizing they do even the little things along the way adds up over time. So, a lot of people can go their entire career without getting appropriately recognized. And I think we strive to give them that recognition for the little wins as well as the big wins.
Right. Because they're used to that. And they're used to that in school. They're used to that as they go through college. And then you plop them into the work environment and no one says anything. They just say,
Right.
well, congratulations, you did your job. That's kind of a letdown, isn't it? There's no like little extra messages or tokens or anything. But someone told me, Tom, one of the younger employees told me, maybe we're just not down with the stuff, like you guys were, like Kevin just mentioned. Maybe we're just not down with that. We want to have a better life in general. And that's somewhat laudable, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at other cultures, I mean, look at Europe and everything, a lot of those countries are going to 4-day work weeks. And, I think that could be something in the future that we'd have to consider to prevent burnout and keep the workforce going as it should.
Mm-hmm. How in particular, everyone, how in particular does O&P need to do this? I mean, we could talk about, Jim, we could talk about how they do it at different investment firms or things like that, or how they do it at orthopedic implants. But O&P is a little bit different, isn't it? In some ways, our small town is a good thing. In some ways, our small town is a challenge, isn't it? I always think we're a small town in healthcare, right? Everyone knows each other's business. People have worked for different groups. Yeah. How do you think
Jerry,
in particular? Yeah, go ahead.
Jerry, one of the things I like Jim spoke about earlier is middle management, and really any management, just kind of keeping an eye and a pulse on what all their employees are doing. Where are they at, and monitoring their health, because since they won't come to us and speak up about they're in trouble, but if we're monitoring that, whether it's their time off, that was one of the examples mentioned, or they're just, seeming to be in a down mood, and it may not even be related to work. It just may be home life, but just seeing what the tempo is of our coworkers and subordinates.
Yeah, I always try and remind my teams to, and usually do it in a blanket, so you're not pointing anyone out. But companies that have employee assistance programs say, hey, if you're not feeling down and you don't want to talk to your manager, call that number. There's no guilt to be associated. Reach out with somebody and give you some other ideas for coping. I also, as far as keeping people engaged, I tell my team, have a list of your team's birthdays and work anniversaries, and use that as a time to reach out to them and say thank you for your commitment or happy birthday or whatever it is. As well as just the daily thank you for this and doing that. Just knowing that somebody's watching what they're doing, somebody's noticing them, and somebody cares and thinks they're doing a good job can be a powerful force to counteract burnout.
Of course, that's a tough one to write in a policy, isn't it?
It is. Some of this is off the books. Sure.
if people think it's a forced thing, like if I gone to Brittany every 3 hours and said, "Are you doing okay? Are you feeling fine?" It might drive her crazy, right? Yeah. One thing that I noticed with innovative groups is it's not that they didn't argue. In fact, innovative groups argued a lot, but they argued well, right? And that's one thing, that things don't get personal necessarily, or they don't cut off from one another. But when we talk about burnout, when we talk about quiet quitting, it's letting the employee find that solution, isn't it? And supporting them in finding it, right? Making suggestions. What do you think, Brittany and Drew? And I'll leave it at that. We're almost at time, right, Joy? What do you think, Brittany and Drew, maybe could have been done, maybe to retain your interest a little bit more, maybe identify your workload sooner, maybe? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's hard for my personal situation. I feel like at the end of the day, it ended up just not being a fit anymore. I really just, as I mentioned earlier, my heart wasn't in it when it came to patient care as much as it was when I started. And I don't know if that's a direct thing to burnout or if it was more just maybe this wasn't the right path for me. And I'm loving what I'm doing now. So maybe it was just my journey and my path was meant to take
Right,
me
that's
here.
great.
And so I I'm not really sure that it was necessarily something that could have been fixed with the situation. I think it was just the path that I needed to take to learn that, hey, it was what I needed to do to get me where I am here today. And that's just part of the journey.
Drew, what do you think?
Yeah, I would really say the same thing again. Is, I think a couple more weeks vacation, a little bit more pay may have kept me around for a few more years, but ultimately, I just don't think patient care was something I was ever going to be really passionate about. And, I work 70 to 80 hours every week now and wake up at 5:30 in the morning looking forward to it every day. So it's just a different, once you find something that you really care about doing and can do it in a way that you're happy with, I think that's kind of the goal that everybody's looking at. And, I think there's a lot of ways that employers can help that. But ultimately, it's kind of up to each individual.
So I know we're at time, Joy, but I want to ask you one follow-up. So what do you think is different in your level of fulfillment than was before?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it is, it's funny because I would have thought when I started that I would get to choose my own hours, which would be great, but I don't. I work when other people want to do stuff. But I still have enough autonomy to run a business the way I want to run it. If there's things that I don't enjoy doing, I don't do them. And I think that's actually been the biggest thing that, and even looking back to when I was in O&P, I never liked doing prosthetics, but it was one of those things where it was just kind of the thing to do. And so I did it, but I would have been much happier if I had stayed, just being a podorthist or a CO, and not kind of continued on, because I filled half my day seeing patients with that I really wasn't interested in seeing. So that's the big thing now, is if I don't like doing something, I don't do it. And
Hearing
that's,
autonomy. I'm hearing
yes.
definitely autonomy, freedom. You still work hard,
Yep.
but
Yeah, I
you
work twice as much as I used to, but
at
it's
your
all the
choice.
stuff I want to work
Yeah.
on. So
Mhm. And Brittany as well, you had a sense of autonomy. You get to choose, but it's also your hours are a little more predictable, not unpredictable, right? So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
And it's just added flexibility in my schedule. If I need to take some time because my daughter has an appointment, but then I can work those hours later at night or on the weekend,
flexibility.
that's my choice. I can flex and change how I need to accommodate my, my
Your
home life.
individual needs. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, great. I Joy, we could talk about this for like 4 or 5 hours, but unfortunately we just have an hour, right? Unless I'm wrong.
I think your time's up, Jerry.
Okay, my time's up. I defer to you, Miss Linda. Thank you. Yeah, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the society you lead, and maybe if people want to get involved in it.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending this webinar. And if anyone is interested on being on the DEI committee, just reach out to staff at AOPA or Joy. And again, thanks for attending.
Thank you so much to everyone.
All
Thank
right.
you, Aopa.
Bye.
All right.